The main hangar of the Celestial Mandate buzzed with excitement. Thousands of soldiers from dozens of different alien species filled the massive space, all waiting for the ceremony to begin. The air smelled of metal and recycled oxygen, and the artificial lights cast everything in a cold white glow. At the center of it all stood Commander Thalvox. He was impossible to miss, standing nearly 3 meters tall. His forearms held perfectly still at his sides as another medal was pinned to his already decorated chest. His purple scales caught the light, shimmering like precious stones. Golden eyes surveyed the crowd with the confidence of someone who had never truly failed. 200 years. That's how long Thalvox had been fighting. 200 years of victories, of saved worlds, of legends written in his name. 47 major campaigns against the Void Swarm, each one successful. Children on 7 different planets grew up seeing his statues in their city squares. He was more than a soldier. He was a symbol. The ceremony continued with speeches praising his latest victory at the periphery gates. Thalvox listened with a slight smile, accepting the praise as naturally as breathing. When it was his turn to speak, his voice boomed across the hangar without needing amplification. "We stand together against the darkness," he declared. "The Void Swarm threatens all civilized life, but they will never break us. I have fought them for 2 centuries, and I will fight them for 2 centuries more if needed. Together we are unstoppable." The crowd erupted in cheers. Soldiers of every species raised their weapons or appendages in salute. It was a moment of pure unity, of shared purpose. In the back of the human delegation, Lieutenant Jinho stood quietly. He didn't cheer. He barely moved. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes watched the ceremony with an expression that was hard to read. This was only his first week aboard the flagship. Everything here was new, overwhelming, strange. Humans were the newest species in the Galactic Coalition. 60 years of spaceflight compared to thousands of years for others. They were small compared to most aliens, weak compared to many, and their lifespans were laughably short by galactic standards. Jinho knew this. Every human aboard knew this. They felt it in every interaction, every sideways glance from other species. After the ceremony ended, officers gathered in the mess hall for a celebration. Thalvox held court at the center table, his booming laugh filling the room as he told stories of past battles. Other officers clustered around him, hanging on his every word. The human delegation sat at a smaller table near the wall. There were only 12 humans aboard the entire ship, a tiny fraction of the 5,000 crew members. They talked quietly among themselves, still adjusting to their new reality. "Look at him," muttered Captain Sunho, the senior human officer, 200 years old. "Can you imagine? We'll all be dead before he's even middle-aged by his species standards," added Lieutenant Bora, a combat engineer with sharp eyes and quick hands. Jinho said nothing. He picked at his food, not really eating. That's when Thalvox noticed them. His golden eyes locked onto the human table, and he raised one of his 4 hands in greeting. "Ah, the newcomers. Humans, correct? Come join us. Don't sit alone in the corner like frightened children." It wasn't meant as an insult. Thalvox's tone was friendly, almost paternal. But several humans stiffened anyway. Captain Sunho stood and led his group to Thalvox's table. The legendary commander made space, pushing aside several other officers with casual authority. "So," Thalvox said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity, "tell me about Earth's military history. I confess I know little about your species. You only joined the Coalition last year, yes?" "That's correct, Commander," Sunho replied carefully. "Fascinating. A young species taking your first steps among the stars." Thalvox's smile was warm. "And you've already volunteered for military service. Brave, if perhaps a bit naive about what you're facing." "We understand the threat the Void Swarm represents," Bora said, her voice controlled. "Do you?" Thalvox laughed, not unkindly. "Forgive me, but understanding and experiencing are very different things. I have fought the Swarm for longer than your entire species has had written language. The horrors I have seen would break most minds. But don't worry. You'll learn. Everyone does if they survive long enough." He turned to Jinho, who had remained silent. "And you, young one? What do you think about joining the greatest military force in the galaxy?" Jinho met his gaze steadily. "It's an honor, Commander. Good answer." Thalvox clapped one massive hand on the table, making glasses jump. "Tell me, how old are you?" 29, sir. 29. Thalvox shook his head in wonder. When I was 29, I hadn't even finished my basic training. My species doesn't reach maturity until 40, but you humans, you mature so quickly, live so briefly, like mayflies burning bright and fast. The comparison hung in the air awkwardly. Several humans exchanged glances, but no one challenged the statement. Over the following weeks, this pattern repeated. Thalvox was never cruel, never deliberately insulting. He simply stated facts as he saw them. Humans were small. Humans were weak. Humans were inexperienced. These weren't criticisms in his mind, just observations. During training exercises, he would comment on how human soldiers tired more quickly than other species. During tactical briefings, he would suggest humans take support roles rather than frontline positions. Always with a smile, always with what he believed was helpful advice. The humans endured it silently. What else could they do? Thalvox was a legend. His word carried more weight than entire governments. Arguing with him seemed pointless. Jinho never argued. He never complained. He simply did his job with mechanical precision. As a tactical coordination officer, his role was to monitor data feeds during operations and provide analysis. He was good at it, everyone admitted. Better than good, actually. His reports were thorough, his observations sharp, his recommendations sound, but he remained distant. While other humans formed friendships with each other and even some alien crew members, Jinho kept to himself. He worked long shifts, volunteered for extra duties, and spent his free time alone. His quarters were sparse. Regulation furniture, a few spare uniforms, and one personal item, a small photograph in a worn frame. It sat on his desk, the only splash of color in the gray room. The photo showed two young people in Earth military uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. One was clearly a younger Jinho. The other was a woman with bright eyes and an infectious smile. Sometimes, late in the ship's night cycle, crew members would see Jinho in the memorial garden. This was a quiet space near the ship's aft section, filled with holographic markers honoring fallen coalition soldiers. Thousands of names glowed softly in the dim light. Jinho would stand before these markers for an hour or more, perfectly still, his face unreadable. Then he would return to his quarters without speaking to anyone. 3 weeks after the medal ceremony, the Celestial Mandate received new orders. A void swarm breakthrough had been detected in the Tajin sector. A colony world of 4 million civilians was in danger. Thalvox would lead the response force. For the first time, humans would be assigned to combat positions instead of support roles. The Coalition Command had decided it was time to test humanity's capabilities under real combat conditions. During the mission briefing, Thalvox stood before his assembled officers with his usual confidence. "We will seal the breach, eliminate the swarm, and save the colony. This is what we do. This is what we have always done." He looked at the human contingent. "For our human friends, this will be your first real battle. Stay close to the experienced soldiers. Follow orders precisely. Do not try to be heroes. If you survive, you will have learned something valuable." Jinho sat in the back row, taking notes on his datapad. His expression never changed as Thalvox outlined the battle plan. When the briefing ended and officers filed out, he remained seated for a moment, staring at the tactical display. Captain Sunho paused beside him. "You ready for this?" "Yes, sir. You don't have to be brave all the time, you know." "It's okay to be nervous." Jinho looked up at him. "I'm not nervous, sir. I'm just thinking." "About what?" For a long moment, Jinho didn't answer. Then he said quietly, "About why we're here. About what we're fighting for." He stood and gathered his equipment. "Permission to prep for deployment, sir." "Granted." As Jinho left the briefing room, he touched his chest pocket briefly, where he kept a folded copy of the photograph from his quarters. The gesture was so quick that most people wouldn't have noticed it. But Captain Sunho noticed. He watched Jinho disappear down the corridor and wondered, not for the first time, what pain the young lieutenant carried behind that carefully controlled exterior. The Celestial Mandate's engines hummed as the ship prepared to jump to the Tajin sector. In his command chair, Thalvox reviewed the mission parameters one final time. Everything was perfect. Everything was under control. Another victory was inevitable. He had no idea that this mission would begin a chain of events that would challenge everything he believed about war, sacrifice, and the true cost of command. The dropships fell through space like metal rain. 23 vessels carrying elite troops from 7 different species, all heading toward the Tajin sector breach point. Inside the lead ship, the Unbroken Honor, soldiers checked their weapons and equipment one final time. Jinho sat at his tactical station, monitoring dozens of data feeds simultaneously. Beside him, Corporal Minji worked communications, while Specialist Doyen handled sensor analysis. The three humans worked smoothly together, speaking only when necessary. Through the view screen, they could see the breach. It looked like a wound in space itself, a jagged tear in reality where darkness bled through into normal space. The void swarm emerged from that darkness, entities that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. All ships, this is Commander Thalvox. His voice came through every speaker, calm and assured. We have done this many times before. Seal the breach, eliminate the swarm, save the colony. Victory is certain because we are certain. Forward. The fleet accelerated. Thalvox piloted his assault carrier with 4 hands working different controls simultaneously. Centuries of experience making every movement precise. He had fought this enemy longer than most species had known about them. He knew their patterns, their weaknesses, their strategies, but the swarm had been learning too. As the coalition fleet entered weapons range, the swarm revealed itself. Not dozens of entities as intelligence had predicted, hundreds. They swarmed around the breach point like insects around a hive, their dark forms writhing with a wrongness that hurt to look at directly. Adjust formation, Thalvox ordered immediately. Heavy weapons to the front, light ships provide covering fire. All assault teams prepare for close combat operations. The battle began. Energy weapons lit up the darkness. Missiles streaked across the void. The swarm rushed forward to meet them, moving faster than should have been possible. Jinho watched the tactical display, his fingers flying across his control panel. Commander, pattern analysis suggests they're using a new formation. They're concentrating force on specific targets instead of spreading evenly. Noted, Thalvox replied. All ships expect concentrated attacks, rotate shield frequencies, and maintain distance. It helped, but not enough. The swarm had adapted. They moved in ways they hadn't before, striking with coordinated precision that suggested intelligence behind their actions. 3 coalition ships took heavy damage in the first 10 minutes, but Thalvox was still better. He had fought for 200 years, and his tactical genius showed in every order he gave. Ships moved where they needed to be. Weapons fired at the exact right moment. Slowly, methodically, the coalition forces pushed forward toward the breach point. From his tactical station, Jinho made constant observations. Energy spike in Sector 7. Swarm entities regrouping near the colony. Breach showing signs of instability. Each comment helped Thalvox refine his strategy. The legendary commander processed the information instantly, adjusting his plans on the fly. He even found a moment to send a message to the human tactical team. Good work. Your observations are useful. It was probably meant as high praise. Coming from Thalvox, it was hours past. The battle raged. Then Thalvox gave the order for ground assault teams to deploy. He would lead them personally to plant the charges that would seal the breach. It was dangerous, requiring troops to enter the heaviest fighting, but it was the only way. Human team, Thalvox ordered. You have a secondary objective. There's a research station near the breach point. Scientists were studying the phenomena before the swarm emerged. Evacuate any survivors. Understood, Commander, Captain Sunho replied. The ground teams launched. Jinho felt the drop pod shudder as it detached from the Unbroken Honor and fell toward the colony surface. The descent was rough, buffeted by energy weapons fire and swarm entities trying to intercept them. They hit the ground hard. The pod's door blasted open and the human team rushed out into chaos. The research station looked like it had been through a war, which it had. Walls were torn open, equipment destroyed, bodies lying where they fell. The swarm had gotten here first. Spread out, Sunho ordered. Find survivors. They moved through the ruined station carefully. Swarm entities could be anywhere. Jinho's weapon felt heavy in his hands, but his training took over. Check corners, watch doorways, trust your team. Minji found them first. Here, sealed laboratory, 3rd floor. Reading life signs, they rushed to the location. 7 scientists huddled inside a reinforced laboratory, the only part of the station the swarm hadn't breached. They were terrified but alive. Coalition rescue, Sunho announced. We're getting you out. But getting them out meant going back through the swarm-infested station. And the swarm knew they were there now. The first entity came through the wall, not the door. Its form was all wrong, like something that existed in 4 dimensions trying to fit into 3. Razor-edged appendages slashed at Lieutenant Bora. She rolled aside and fired, her plasma weapon punching through its mass. More came. The narrow corridors became a nightmare of close combat. Humans had a disadvantage in strength compared to most aliens. But in these tight spaces, that mattered less. What mattered was accuracy, speed, and teamwork. Minji provided covering fire with shocking precision, every shot hitting exactly where it needed to. Doyen rigged explosive traps at corridor intersections, bringing down ceilings to block pursuing swarm entities. And Jinho coordinated their movements, his voice steady over the team channel. Left corridor clear for 5 seconds. Drop ceiling now. Fall back to extraction point. They fought their way through the station meter by meter, protecting the scientists while holding off waves of swarm entities. It should have been impossible. By every calculation, the small human team should have been overwhelmed, but they made it. All 7 scientists reached the extraction pod alive. So did every human team member. As the pod launched back toward orbit, Bora actually laughed, wild and breathless.
Did we just do that?
Tell me we actually just did that. We did, Sunho confirmed, checking for injuries. Everyone okay? They were. Bruised, exhausted, but alive. Meanwhile, Thalvox's primary mission had also succeeded. The breach ceiling charges detonated in perfect sequence, collapsing the dimensional tear. Without reinforcements, the remaining swarm entities were quickly eliminated by the coalition fleet. Victory. Another one. Another success for the legendary commander Thalvox. When the human team returned to the Unbroken Honor, they found the ship celebrating. Thalvox stood in the main hangar, congratulating his troops. His armor was scorched from close combat, but he looked triumphant. He noticed the humans disembarking. The evacuation team, report. 7 civilians rescued, 0 casualties, sir, Sunho reported. Excellent. You performed adequately for such inexperienced soldiers. Thalvox smiled, intending it as encouragement. Perhaps humans have potential after all. Adequately. The word hung in the air. The humans had just fought through impossible odds, saved 7 lives, and lost no one. And they had performed adequately, but no one challenged it. They just saluted and moved to their quarters. That night, the ship held a full celebration in the officers' mess. Thalvox told stories of the battle, praising the veterans who had fought beside him for decades. He mentioned the humans briefly, noting their satisfactory performance during the evacuation. Jinho attended for exactly 15 minutes, then excused himself. He walked to the memorial garden, that quiet space filled with holographic markers for the fallen. He stood there for a long time, hands clasped behind his back, staring at one marker in particular. It was new, only 3 months old. The name glowed softly, Captain Yuna. A tear fell down Jinho's cheek. Just one. He wiped it away quickly, as if ashamed of showing emotion even when alone. Later, in his quarters, he sat at his desk and pulled out the photograph. 2 young people in Earth military uniforms grinning at the camera. Friends. Maybe more than friends. 2 people who had planned to see the stars together. We saved 7 today, he said quietly to the photograph. You would have liked that. You always wanted to save everyone. He placed the photo back on his desk carefully, making sure it was perfectly straight. Then he opened his datapad and began writing his after-action report. Professional, detailed, emotionless. Just facts and observations, nothing personal. That's what soldiers did. They did their job. They wrote their reports. They prepared for the next mission. Emotions had no place in military service. But in the privacy of his quarters with no one watching, Jinho allowed himself to feel the weight of what they had done. 7 people alive who would have died. It was good. It mattered, but it didn't bring Yuna back. Nothing would ever bring her back. Outside his window, the celestial mandate turned toward its next destination. The war against the Void Swarm never stopped. There was always another mission, another battle, another chance to prove humanity's worth. And in the command center, Thalvox reviewed the mission reports with satisfaction. Another perfect victory. His record remained unblemished. 48 successful campaigns now. He noticed Jinho's report among the files. The humans' tactical observations had been genuinely useful. Perhaps these young, short-lived creatures could contribute something valuable after all. Give them a few more decades of experience and they might even become decent soldiers. 3 weeks after the Tajin sector victory, The Celestial Mandate received new orders. Intelligence had detected unusual void swarm activity in the Hanara Nebula. Someone needed to investigate. The mission was classified as low risk, reconnaissance only. Avoid engagement if possible, gather data, and return. It was routine work. The kind of mission that happened dozens of times per month across Coalition space. Command assigned Thalvox anyway. It was almost a joke among the staff. Sending the Coalition's greatest warrior on a simple reconnaissance mission was like using a battleship to deliver mail. Thalvox assembled his team, 20 soldiers including 3 humans, Jinho for tactical analysis, Lieutenant Bora for combat engineering, and Ensign Hyunwoo who specialized in xenobiology. The rest were veterans who had served with Thalvox for years. They took a stealth corvette called Silent Approach into the nebula. The swirling clouds of ionized gas made sensor readings difficult, which was exactly why the swarm might hide there. For 3 days they navigated through the nebula finding nothing. The atmosphere on the ship was relaxed. Thalvox was in high spirits, telling stories to pass the time. "I remember the Battle of Kelos Prime," he said one evening as the team gathered for a meal. "We were outnumbered 10-1. My commanding officer at the time wanted to retreat. I said no. We held the line for 16 hours until reinforcements arrived. I was only 70 years old then, barely more than a child." The veterans laughed and added their own stories. Even the humans found themselves drawn in. Thalvox was a natural storyteller, and his tales of legendary battles were genuinely entertaining. During one of these sessions, Thalvox noticed Jinho sitting silently in the corner. "You never share stories, Lieutenant. Surely Earth has some military history worth telling." Jinho looked up from his datapad. "Some stories aren't mine to tell, Commander." A shame. Perhaps when you're older you'll have tales of your own." Thalvox meant it kindly, but the implication was clear. Jinho was too young, too inexperienced to have real stories yet. The conversation shifted to other topics, and Jinho returned to his work. On the 4th day, sensors detected something massive deep within the nebula. The energy readings were unlike anything in Coalition databases. Not quite void swarm, but definitely related to their dimensional technology. "All stations alert," Thalvox ordered, his casual mood vanishing instantly. "Approach with caution. Weapons ready, but do not fire without my command." As they got closer, they discovered a graveyard. Dozens of ships drifted in the nebula, all heavily damaged. Some were from species humanity had never encountered. Some were ancient, dating back centuries. At the center was a massive organic structure. It pulsed with dark energy, growing slowly, feeding on something invisible. "Commander," Hyunwoo said, his voice tight with fear, "I think it's feeding on residual life force from the dead ships. This is a swarm breeding ground." Before Thalvox could order a retreat, the nebula erupted. Swarm entities poured from everywhere. Dozens became hundreds. The Silent Approach had been detected the moment it entered the nebula. The swarm had been waiting, full speed. Thalvox commanded, "Get us out of here." The corvette's engines screamed to life. They raced through the nebula with the swarm in pursuit. The ship was fast, built for stealth and escape. But the swarm had learned. A massive entity, larger than anything previously recorded, materialized directly in their path. The Silent Approach tried to dodge. It wasn't fast enough. The impact was devastating. Hull breaches on 3 decks, main engines damaged. Life support failing in several sections. Emergency alarms shrieked through the ship. Damage reports flooded the bridge. Thalvox processed them all instantly, his 2 centuries of experience taking over. "Engineering, I need engines in 15 minutes. Damage control teams to breach points. All combat personnel prepare to repel boarders." But the swarm wasn't trying to board. They were surrounding the ship, cutting off all escape routes. More entities kept arriving, drawn by the wounded prey. Bora appeared on the bridge, her uniform torn and scorched from fighting fires on the lower decks. "Commander, the engines need at least 20 minutes. "We don't have 20 minutes. Thalvox looked at the tactical display. She was right. In 10 minutes, maybe less, the swarm would overwhelm their shields and tear the ship apart. Someone had to buy time. "I need volunteers," Thalvox said quietly. "Take an assault shuttle, draw the swarm away while we make repairs. It's a suicide mission. I won't order anyone to go." Bora stepped forward immediately. "I'll do it." "Lieutenant," Thalvox began. "No discussion, Commander. I'm a combat engineer. I can pilot that shuttle better than anyone here." She looked at the other crew members. But I need a team. Who's with me? Hyunwoo stood. I'm in. 3 veteran soldiers volunteered. 5 people total, 5 people volunteering to die. Jinho stood, but Bora stopped him with a hand on his chest. No, you're tactical. You're more valuable keeping this ship alive. Bora. She grinned, that wild expression she got before doing something dangerous. Someone needs to remember us, right? That's your job now. She punched his shoulder lightly. Don't screw it up. The volunteer team rushed to the shuttle bay. The assault shuttle was barely space-worthy, hastily armed with whatever weapons they could bolt on. It was a coffin with engines, but it flew. Jinho watched from the tactical station as the shuttle launched. Bora piloted like a demon, weaving through swarm entities while the others fired every weapon they had. They broadcast on all frequencies, making noise, drawing attention. It worked. The main swarm force broke off from the silent approach to pursue the shuttle. On the Corvette, repair crews worked frantically. Sparks flew as welding torches sealed hull breaches. Engineers rerouted power, coaxed damaged systems back to life. Jinho coordinated everything from his station, his voice steady despite what he was watching on his screen. Damage Control Team 3, focus on Section 7. Engineering, we need shields at minimum 30%. Medical Team to Deck 4, professional, calm. No emotions showing, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the console. The shuttle danced through the swarm for 11 minutes. Bora pushed the engines past their safety limits, pulled maneuvers that should have torn the shuttle apart. The others fired until their weapons overheated, then fired anyway. 11 minutes of desperate brilliance. Engines ready, engineering reported. We can move. Then move, Thalvox ordered. The silent approach's engines fired. The ship lurched forward, accelerating away from the swarm. On the shuttle, Bora saw them escaping. Her voice came through the comm, breaking up with static. Good luck, everyone. Give them hell for us. She made one final burn toward the nebula's edge, trying to buy just a few more seconds. The massive swarm entity caught them. The shuttle's shields collapsed like paper. The hull breached. And then there was nothing. Just empty space where 5 heroes had existed moments before. On the silent approach bridge, everyone stood in silence. Thalvox's 4 hands gripped his command chair. The only sound was the countdown from engineering confirming engine status. They escaped. The swarm pursued for a while, but the Corvette maintained enough speed to stay ahead. By the time they reached Coalition space, the swarm had turned back. 5 dead. Critical intelligence gathered. Mission technically successful. Back on the Celestial Mandate, there was no celebration. Thalvox filed his report mechanically. The fallen soldiers would be honored. Their names would be added to the memorial garden. This was war. Loss was inevitable, but something felt different this time. That evening, Thalvox found himself in the memorial garden. 5 new holographic markers glowed softly. Bora, Hyunwoo, 3 others. Jinho stood before them at perfect attention. He had been standing there for an hour. When he finally turned to leave, he found Thalvox watching him. Lieutenant Bora was brave, Thalvox said quietly. She died a hero's death. The Coalition will remember her. Yes, sir. Jinho's voice was empty. You humans surprise me. Such short lives, yet you spend them so freely. Something flickered across Jinho's face. Something dangerous. But he only said, Permission to return to quarters, sir. Granted. Alone in the memorial garden, Thalvox looked at the 5 new markers. He had lost thousands of soldiers over 2 centuries. Each loss had meaning, each sacrifice had purpose. So why did this one feel different? He didn't understand. Not yet. 2 weeks later, senior staff gathered for a tactical review. The purpose was to analyze the Hanara Nebula mission and develop new protocols for swarm encounters. Thalvox led the review, walking through each decision. Despite the losses, he concluded that tactically, most choices had been sound. The swarm had simply evolved faster than expected. Lieutenant Bora's sacrifice was not in vain, he told the assembled officers. Her actions saved the ship and provided time for our escape. The intelligence we gathered will save countless lives in future engagements. This is how warriors should die, with purpose, with meaning. Around the room, most officers nodded agreement. In my 2 centuries of service, Thalvox continued, I have seen thousands die in battle. Each death taught me something. Each sacrifice had value. Lieutenant Bora and the others have joined the eternal ranks of honored warriors. They achieved glory. A Gillian officer raised a question about morale management. The humans seem to process loss differently than we do. Thalvok stared at Jinho. In 200 years, very few beings had directly contradicted him. Especially not junior officers. Especially not during official briefings. Wrong? His golden eyes narrowed. About what, Lieutenant? About statistics. Jinho took a step forward. His carefully maintained calm was cracking, and beneath it was something raw and furious. About necessary costs. About everything. Explain yourself. Jinho reached into his uniform and pulled out the battered photograph he always carried. He held it up for the entire room to see. This is Captain Yuna, he said quietly. She was my best friend. We grew up together in the same neighborhood. We enlisted together. We survived basic training together. When humanity was accepted into the coalition, we applied together. We were going to see the stars together. He paused, staring at the photograph. Around the room, officers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. 3 months ago, Jinho continued, Captain Yuna was assigned to the Rising Dawn, a human destroyer on patrol near the Kalos Expanse. The Void Swarm attacked. Her ship was destroyed with all hands. 217 people died in 4 minutes. The Coalition's official report listed it as acceptable combat losses in a successful defensive action. A statistic. One more number in the casualty count. Thalvok shifted uncomfortably. Lieutenant, I understand personal loss is difficult, but you understand nothing. The words were quiet, but hit like a physical blow. You stand there with your 200 years, your 48 campaigns, your medals and statues, and you tell us that individual deaths don't matter? That my friend, my sister, and everything but blood is just a minor loss? A statistic that we should feel proud about? Jinho took another step forward. For the first time in decades, Thalvox felt uncertain. You mock Lieutenant Bora's sacrifice by calling it magnificent, as if her death was a gift to us. You tell us we should envy her for dying. Do you know what Bora told me the night before that mission? She talked about her mother back on Earth, about how she was saving her military pay to send home so her younger brother could attend university. She had plans, Commander, dreams, a future that she wanted to live, not throw away. The room was utterly silent. Even the ship's ambient sound seemed muted. Yes, she gave it up to save us, and I will be grateful for that sacrifice for the rest of my life. But don't you dare tell me I should be happy about it. Don't tell me her death was glorious. It was tragic. It was necessary, but it was still a tragedy. Jinho's voice dropped lower, more intense. You think because you've lived longer, fought longer, that you understand sacrifice better than we do? No, you've just become numb to it. You've lived so long that individual lives have stopped meaning anything to you. Each death is just one more in a long list that stretches back centuries. That's not wisdom, Commander. That's not perspective. That's just empty. He held up the photograph again, his hand trembling slightly. Every human in this room knows we'll probably die young by your standards. We know our friendships are brief. We know our lives are short. But that's exactly why each one matters so much. We don't have centuries to know each other. We have years, if we're lucky. Months, sometimes. Every moment, every bond, every single person is precious because we know how quickly it can end. Thalvok stood frozen, all 4 arms hanging limp at his sides. 200 years of certainty was crumbling. He had lived by a warrior's code that transformed death into glory, sacrifice into honor. It had helped him survive the loss of thousands of comrades. It had kept him functional through centuries of warfare. But listening to this young human, barely 30 years old, speaking with such pain and fury, Thalvok suddenly saw his philosophy from a completely different angle, and he didn't like what he saw. Yuna was not a statistic, Jinho said, his voice breaking slightly. Bora was not a statistic. They were people with families, with dreams, with futures that will never happen now. Yuna wanted to open a restaurant when she retired. Something small, she said, where she could cook food from home for people far from Earth. That will never happen. Bora's brother will never get that money for university because she's dead. Those dreams are gone. Forever. Tears ran down Jinho's face now, but he made no move to wipe them away. And you will never ever convince me that their deaths were anything other than tragedies that we should mourn, not celebrate. You can call it glory if it helps you sleep at night. But I call it what it is, loss, permanent, irreversible loss. And no amount of tactical success makes that okay. The silence in the briefing room was absolute. Thalvox tried to speak. "Lieutenant," but he had no words. For 200 years he had praised fallen soldiers. He had given countless speeches about honor and glory. He had transformed death into meaning because it was the only way to continue fighting. Now, standing before this young human, he realized something terrible. He had been lying. To himself, to his soldiers, to everyone. Death wasn't glorious. It was just death. And calling it necessary didn't make it less painful for those left behind. "Permission to be dismissed?" "Sir," Jinho said to Captain Sunho, not even looking at Thalvox anymore. "Granted," Sunho replied quietly. Jinho walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft hiss. The silence he left behind was deafening. Captain Sunho stood slowly. "Commander Thalvox, the human contingent respectfully requests a recess to process this discussion. We'll submit our tactical analysis in writing." Thalvox could only nod, still stunned. The humans filed out together, a small group moving with quiet dignity. The other species officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some looked at Thalvox with something like pity. Others simply avoided his eyes altogether. Slowly, the briefing room emptied. Officers found excuses to leave, none of them wanting to be there anymore. Thalvox stood alone at the front of the empty room. The tactical display still showed data from the Hanara Nebula mission, casualty statistics, mission success parameters, all the numbers that usually defined victory or defeat. 5 deaths. That's what the display showed. Just a number. But now, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Thalvox thought about those 5 as individuals. Bora, who was saving money for her brother's education. Hyunwoo, who specialized in xenobiology. 3 other soldiers whose names he had known but whose lives he had never really considered. They had dreams. They had futures. They had people who loved them, and now they were gone. The weight of that realization hit him like physical force. His legs felt weak. He sat down heavily in the nearest chair, all forearms resting on his knees. 200 years. 48 campaigns. How many had died under his command? He could access the exact number in his service record, but he was suddenly afraid to look. Was it thousands? Tens of thousands? How many dreams had ended because of orders he gave? He tried to justify it. They died to save others. They died fighting evil. Their sacrifices prevented greater tragedies. All of that was true, but it didn't change the fact that they were dead. That they would never achieve their dreams, never see their families again, never experience another sunrise or laugh at a joke or feel rain on their skin, and he had called them statistics. Thalvox sat in the empty briefing room for a long time, staring at nothing. For the first time in 2 centuries, the great commander Thalvox, hero of the coalition, living legend, felt something he had almost forgotten. Doubt. Later that evening, he went to his quarters and did something he hadn't done in decades. He accessed his complete service record and pulled up the casualty reports from every mission he had ever commanded. The list was long. Very long. He read names, hundreds of them, thousands. Each one had been someone's friend, someone's family member. Each one had dreams and plans and futures that ended. He remembered some of them vaguely. Warriors who had fought beside him for years, but most were just names, faces he couldn't recall. People who had served under him briefly before dying in battles he barely remembered. They had trusted him. They had followed his orders. And they had died. Thalvox closed the file. His hands were shaking. He went to the memorial garden, something he had done countless times for ceremonies and formal occasions. But this time was different. This time he was alone, and he wasn't there to make a speech. He walked among the thousands of holographic markers reading names. So many names. The memorial garden honored all coalition fallen, not just those from his missions, but seeing them all together was overwhelming. He found Yuna's marker. Someone, probably Jinho, had left a small paper crane beside it. Human tradition, he knew. A wish for peace. Next to Yuna's marker was Bora's, and Hyunwoo's. 5 new markers for 5 people who died 2 weeks ago. People, not statistics. Thalvox stood before those markers for a long time. "I'm sorry," he said quietly to the empty garden. "I should have known better. I should have remembered that each of you was a person. I'm sorry it took someone else's pain to remind me." The holographic markers glowed softly, offering no forgiveness or condemnation, just names and dates marking lives that had ended too soon. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Commander Thalvox, the legendary hero who had saved worlds and won impossible battles, felt the full weight of every death he had caused, and it was almost too much to bear. He stayed in the memorial garden until the ship's night cycle ended and artificial morning began. The days after the confrontation were strange for everyone aboard the Celestial Mandate. Word spread quickly about what had happened in the briefing room. Soldiers whispered in corridors. Officers exchanged uncertain glances. The legendary Commander Thalvox, who had never been questioned, who had never been wrong, had been challenged by a human lieutenant, and he had no response. Thalvox tried to continue his duties normally, but something fundamental had broken inside him. When he walked through the ship, soldiers still saluted with reverence, but the humans looked at him differently now, not with hatred, but with a kind of disappointed distance. Worse, some of the other species officers were starting to question their own beliefs about war and sacrifice. If the great Thalvox could be wrong, what else might they have been wrong about? Thalvox withdrew to his quarters more often, reviewing old mission reports. He read casualty lists from battles decades past. Each name was someone who had trusted him, followed him, died for him. One night, unable to rest, he returned to the memorial garden. He had always come here for ceremonies, always with prepared speeches about honor and glory. Now he came alone just to look, really look, thousands of markers, each one a person, each one with dreams and families and futures that ended. He found himself standing before Bora's marker again. Beside it, someone had left a small metal gear, probably from her engineering tools. A memorial from her friends. "I called you a statistic," Thalvox said quietly to the glowing marker. "You saved lives, and I reduced your sacrifice to a number in my report. I was wrong. I'm sorry." The marker offered no response, just a name and a date, marking a life that had lasted only 32 years. 2 weeks after the confrontation, a new emergency arrived. A coalition mining colony in the Dalsan system was under heavy swarm attack. Multiple breach points, 60,000 civilians in danger, including 3,000 humans. The Celestial Mandate was the closest capital ship. Thalvox was ordered to lead the relief force. Under normal circumstances, this was exactly his element. He had saved dozens of colonies. But now, as he studied the tactical situation, all he could think about was the cost. The battle plan formed in his mind quickly. It was brilliant, as his plans always were. Aggressive assault. Hit the swarm hard and fast, seal the breaches before they could bring in reinforcements. It would save the colony. It would also cost lives. Probably hundreds. His hand hovered over the communication panel, frozen. In the past, he would have called for volunteers immediately. Now he hesitated. Captain Sunho noticed. "Commander?" "Your orders?" Thalvox looked at him. "The assault teams that go in to seal those breaches. They'll face heavy casualties, 40 to 50% by my calculations." "Yes, sir. That's the tactical reality. How do I ask them to die?" The question came out before Thalvox could stop it. Sunho seemed surprised, but he answered carefully. "You don't ask, Commander. You order, and they'll go because that's what soldiers do, but..." He paused. "Maybe it would help if you understood why they go. Not for glory or statistics. They go because someone has to, and they're brave enough to be the ones who do it." Thalvox thought about that for a long moment. Then he made a decision that went against 200 years of military tradition. "Call a full assembly," he ordered. "All soldiers participating in the operation, everyone." "Sir? That's 2,000 personnel. We don't usually, I know. Do it anyway." An hour later, 2,000 soldiers filled the main hangar. This was unprecedented. Normally, only officers attended tactical briefings. They expected a typical speech. Honor, glory, victory. The kind of rousing words Thalvox had given 100 times before. What they got was different. "I need to tell you about a mistake I made," Thalvox began. His voice lacked its usual booming confidence. 2 weeks ago, I dishonored the sacrifice of brave soldiers by treating their deaths as statistics. I implied that individual lives matter less than the greater mission. I was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was unheard of. Legends didn't admit mistakes. "In my 200 years of service," Thalvox continued, I have sent thousands to their deaths. I have lost thousands of comrades. And somewhere along the way I forgot that each one was a person, someone with family, with friends, with dreams they would never fulfill. I turned them into numbers to make their loss bearable for me. That was cowardice disguised as wisdom. He saw Jinho in the crowd standing with the other humans. Their eyes met briefly. Today I must send some of you into danger. Some of you will not return. The assault teams that breach the swarm perimeter face approximately 50% casualties. I could order you to go, and you would because you are all brave soldiers. He paused, looking across the assembled crowd. But I need you to understand something. If you fall today, you are not statistics. You are not acceptable losses. You are people whose absence will leave holes in the universe that can never be filled. Your friends will mourn you. Your families will grieve, and I will carry the weight of every single death for whatever remains of my life. The crowd was absolutely silent. No one had ever heard Thalvok speak like this. I cannot promise glory, he said. I cannot promise that your deaths will be magnificent or enviable. What I can promise is that if you fall, you will be remembered as individuals, not numbers. Your sacrifice will be mourned, not celebrated, and I will do everything in my power, everything, to bring as many of you home as possible. He straightened to his full height. This is the mission. This is the cost. We need volunteers for the assault teams. Not because it's glorious, but because 60,000 civilians will die if we fail. That's the only reason that matters. He looked across the crowd one more time. Dismissed. The room emptied slowly. Thalvox waited, unsure if his changed approach had destroyed the respect his soldiers once held for him. Maybe they needed the legend, the confident hero who made death seem meaningful. Then soldiers started approaching the volunteer roster, not rushing with enthusiasm, but walking with quiet determination. Sorvians, Galeans, Caraxians, and yes, many humans. Jinho was among them. He signed the roster without hesitation. Thalvox stopped him. Lieutenant, you don't have to. I know, Jinho said, but there are human families in that colony. Children who deserve to grow up and... He paused. Bora's death did mean something. Not because it was glorious, but because she saved lives. That's enough. It doesn't make the loss acceptable. No, Jinho agreed. It doesn't, but it makes it necessary. There's a difference. He looked directly at Thalvox. You're learning that difference, I think. The assault on Dalsan Colony was brutal. The swarm had established strong positions around multiple breach points. But Thalvox led from the front, fighting with all the skill of his 2 centuries of experience. But he fought differently now. He took personal risks that he would have delegated before, trying to spare his troops whenever possible. His tactical genius remained intact, but his priorities had shifted. When an assault team got pinned down by overwhelming swarm forces, Thalvox himself led the rescue. His 4 arms wielded weapons with devastating efficiency as he carved a path through swarm entities. He saved 17 soldiers who would have died otherwise. When a breach point proved more heavily defended than expected, Thalvox redesigned the approach mid-battle. The new method was slower, required more resources, but saved lives. Jinho, coordinating from the tactical center, noticed the changes immediately. The commander was still brilliant, still effective. But now he valued lives over expediency. The battle took longer than expected. It required more resources, but fewer died. The colony was saved. All 60,000 civilians evacuated safely. The swarm forces were eliminated, the breaches sealed, but the cost was still real. 47 coalition soldiers didn't return. The casualties were lower than Thalvox predicted. His adjusted tactics had worked, but that didn't make the losses hurt less. Among the dead was Corporal Minji, the human who had fought at Tejan Sector and survived the Hanara Nebula evacuation. She died sealing the final breach point, her last act saving her entire squad. Back on the Celestial Mandate, Thalvox did something he had never done in 200 years. He personally visited the quarters of every fallen soldier's closest friend or family member aboard the ship, not to give speeches about honor and glory. Just to say, I'm sorry for your loss. Tell me about them. And he listened. For hours, he listened to stories about the people who died, their quirks, their dreams, their terrible jokes, their kindnesses, their flaws. He made no attempt to turn their deaths into something glorious. He just let their friends and families grieve. When he reached the human quarters to learn about Minji, he found Jinho and several others gathered, sharing memories. I wondered if you would tell me about Corporal Minji, Thalvok said quietly. I realized I barely knew her. I would like to correct that mistake. There was a long pause. Then Jinho gestured to an empty seat. She loved terrible puns, like truly awful ones. She'd spend hours thinking of them just to make people groan. Thalvok sat and listened as the humans painted a picture of Minji. Not as a soldier or a sacrifice, but as a person, someone who snored loudly, someone obsessed with a card game called poker, someone who sent messages home to her sister every week without fail. When the stories wound down, Thalvok spoke.